Welcome to episode 23 of my guide to video game history. Prior to 1995, gaming on PCs were a nightmare, with only the technical savvy needing apply. The problem was that DOS and Windows 3 only had 640k base memory to play with. Bill Gates may never have actually said the quote, 640k of memory should be enough for anybody, but nevertheless it was this limitation that made DOS for gaming extremely complex. With gamers getting an average game to run on DOS, you had to write a thing called a batch file, which are small programs. And these programs were placed on floppy boot disks. And the program was essentially there to use as little base memory as possible and put as much of your PC peripherals, such as CD drives, in the higher memory and extended memory where you had oodles of space. In fact, it was this world of DOS and batch files that helped myself cut my teeth in the world of PCs as I tried to optimize my underspecified PC as much as possible, and so constantly breaking it in the process. The year is 1994, and Microsoft was in full swing, having cornered the operating system market for the PC, and they were at the peak of their game. They were about to release their new operating system, codenamed Chicago, which would be named, on launch, Windows 95. This had a nice user interface and would be a massive friendly step for non-techies in the world of PCs. But for it to truly hit mass market appeal outside the workplace, Windows 95 needed to make gaming much more easier. The problem was that game developers actually loved DOS, as it gave them direct control over their hardware, and this new operating system would hide all that away from them. Also, the vast array of hardware that a PC gamer could have made it really painful and more complex to write games for the PC, as there was no way of developers anticipating what hardware setup a particular gamer may have. 3 Microsoft employees, Craig Eisler, Alex St. John and Eric Engstrom, realised this, and with only 9 months to go to the launch of the Windows 95 operating system, they set about to create a Windows development kit that addressed these issues, giving developers direct hardware control and, more importantly, containing a library of drivers so they didn't have to waste time worrying about the type of hardware a gamer had. This service development kit tool was called DirectX and was released shortly after Windows 95 came out, and it would be this tool that would be the major factor to make PC gaming accessible to all for the first time. This DirectX allowed PC gaming to truly explode, with an eclectic range of games for the platform that are still revered to this day. And for the remaining part of this episode, I will look at some of these fantastic games that were released. In 1994, Will Wright and the company Maxis would continue the phenomenal success of their SimCity games with a sequel called SimCity 2000. This took the isometric viewpoint of the city and improved the complexity of the game, making it another huge hit. Also in 1994, Adeline Software International released the often overlooked isometric adventure Little Big Adventure, which had you play Twinsen, who must gather magical objects to thwart the evil Dr. Funfrock. The game was full of ingenious puzzles and zany Frenchiness, and I absolutely adore it. The same team also in September 1995 released a follow-on to the classic 2D game Flashback with a sequel called Fade to Black. The game was enjoyable, although really quite buggy in places. Still, it had amazing 3D for the time and enjoyable stealth gameplay mechanics and action throughout. Also in 1995, for Terry Pratchett fans, such as myself, prayers were finally answered when we got a graphical adventure game set in the Discworld universe. Produced by Perfect Entertainment and headed up by gaming veteran Greg Barnett, who helped bring the world horror game series The Hobbit and Way of the Exploding Fist games when he worked at Melbourne House. In this Discworld game, they based the story loosely on one of the funniest books in the series called Guards, about summoning of dragons. The game was great, with all the characters making an appearance as you played the lovable failed wizard Rincewind as he blunders his way through the game. What made the game so special, however, was that also the hilarious script and impressive voiceover talent used for the game. Such talent including Eric Idle as Rincewind, Tony Robinson and Rob Brydon. Another great adventure game released in November this year was Broken Sword, The Shadow of the Templars, by Revolution Software and developed by Charles Cecil, who had made a name for himself previously with the classic adventure game Beneath the Steel Sky. The game was simply gorgeous, with lush hand-drawn characters and backdrops which set the scene to an intricate plot that had you play American tourist George Stobart, who gets embroiled in intrigue and conspiracy that takes him around the world. Over in Sierra, meanwhile, in December, Jane Jensen's next instalment of Gabriel Knight Saga was released, called The Beast Within, Gabriel Knight 2. This took the adventure series with real actors and a wonderful story about werewolves that still to this day is one of my favourite adventure games. Then, the following year, in February 1996, Microprose would release Sid Meier's Civilization 2, although actually Sid Meier was not actually involved with the project. The game took the original hit title, but improved on the game's complexity and offering much better graphics, and to many gamers, they actually prefer this over the original game. Another great classic adventure was released in February 1996, and the game was called Spycraft: The Great Game, which still to this day goes down as one of my favourite spy games. The game had you investigate a Russian presidential candidate assassination as you unravelled who was behind it all. The game was short but extremely immersive, with great acting and storyline drawing you into its intricate plot. Also in 1996, Perfect Entertainment was back again with another Discworld adventure game called Discworld 2, Missing Presumed. This was a loose retelling of another classic book in the series, called Reaper Man, but it drew inspiration, quite frankly, from all the books of the series. Again you played the hapless wizard Rincewind, and again you had Eric Idle as the fantastic voicing talent. And although Tony Robinson had not returned, you had the brilliant Nigel Planner, he of Neil from The Young Ones, who offered his considerable voicing talents. This game was even better in my opinion, with brilliant hand-drawn graphics, and this time around an even funnier script, which had you laughing from the title song That's Death right through to the final scene. Then, in August this year, Bethesda Software would return with Elder Scrolls 2, Daggerfall, which improved the scope of the original even more by adding a far more realised world for you to explore. Meanwhile, Peter Monolou of Bullfrog Productions was back again, rocking the world with a sequel to their classic game, Syndicate, called Syndicate Wars. This time it showed the action in true 3D, and as so allowing the gamer to zoom in and out and rotate the action. This was a fantastic update, with destructible scenery and massively destructive guns at your disposal as your agents tore up the landscape. Also at this time, Bullfrog released another pearl of a game called Dungeon Keeper, which had you play the RPG from the point of view of the evil villain in charge of the actual dungeon. So you had to build your dungeon with traps and dastardly minions to thwart the constant attempt of those budding annoying heroes. The game was refreshingly unique and full of humour and great fun to play. In November 1996, Blizzard North created a new type of RPG called Diablo, which set gamers in the Dungeon and Dragon world, but with all the frantic action of Gauntlet. It was a great combination, and it became a massive hit for the company. Meanwhile, Bullfrog would continue apace this year with Theme Hospital, which took the theme park management concept but set it obviously this time in a hospital. In 1997, meanwhile, LucasArts released the third Monkey Island game in the series, called Curse of Monkey Island. The game this time had Jonathan Akeley and Larry Ahern at the helm, with Ron Gilbert deciding to leave LucasArts before the game was started. But the game was in good hands, with both of these people being seasoned LucasArts adventure veterans, and the third game did not disappoint, with gorgeous hand-drawn graphics and humorous plot, whilst introducing such memorable new characters such as Murray the Skull, which would have gamers in stitches. October, meanwhile, in 1996, would see Charles Cecil and Revolution Software return with Broken Sword 2, The Smoking Mirror. This was more of the same, continuing the story of George and Nicole in this time an Aztec fun-fueled adventure that was well received at the time. Then there was Age of Empires, released by Assemble Studios, which would go on to do Halo Wars. Also, incidentally, their lead designer, Bruce Shelley, would go on to do Farmville for Facebook. The game, originally called Dawn of Man, took inspiration from Civilization and the real-time strategy of Command & Conquer, combining them to produce an absorbing game that kept many gamers addicted, and it was a massive commercial success, with the series selling over 20 million games. In November 1997, Tim Kaine and Black Isle Studios would release Fallout, an RPG game set in an apocalyptic future world in the year 21061, where you must leave Vault 13, where you've been hidden away since the nuclear war took place, to find water. The game is a wonderful turn-based strategy game that offered an enjoyable alternative to the usual sword and sorcery setting of its peers. Westwood Studios, meanwhile, this month would leave the Command & Conquer world to release the adventure game Blade Runner, taking all that was great about the seminal film and capturing the look and feel perfectly, which when combined with the engaging plot, it made it irresistible. It was technically impressive too, using 3D characters and pre-rendered backdrops. Jordan Mechner of Prince of Persia fame would return this year with his adventure game called The Last Express that took rotoscoping animation, that is to say tracing around filmed actors to produce realistic animations, to its wonderful conclusion of a fully fledged adventure game. Set on the Orient Express in 1914, it had you play Dr. Robert Caff, who gets caught up in a murder mystery and intrigue. The game was beautiful to behold in the looks department, and although the real-time element wasn't to everyone's cup of tea, it nevertheless is an adventure game well worth trying. But for me, the most exciting game released on the PC in 1997 was Shiny Entertainment's MDK, or Murder Death Kill game. This had you play Kurt Hectic, a janitor in a new coil battlesuit who must save the world from invasion. This game was stacked full of neat ideas, such as a sniper rifle and lots of mini set pieces that broke up the action and kept things fresh throughout. This game is fun and frantic and really needs to make a reappearance. On to 1998. Parallax Software, who did the Descent games, would split up this year and create two new firms called Volition Software and Outrage Entertainment. So in March this year, when Volition Software released Descent, Free Space, The Great War, the name caused fury with Outrage Entertainment, as they felt they had no right to continue using the name. In truth, though, despite the name and a tiny bit of the code, this was a drastically different experience, having you this time flying a star cruiser and fighting out in huge space battles. The game was great, taking inspiration from such titles as X-Wing and the Wing Commander games, but it had much bigger battles and impressive action. Fallout 2 would return in September this year, continuing the story this time of the son of the last hero, and in this game you would go on a quest to find the Garden of Eden construction kit. In many ways this was more more of the same, but when the first game was so good, that's not such a bad thing. Another March release was Blizzard Software's StarCraft. This took what the team had learned from real-time strategy games with their Warcraft game, but set it this time on an alien world, where you could play one of 3 races, each with their unique abilities and playing styles. It gave a fuller playing experience to the game. By October 1998, adventure games was beginning to wane in popularity, with gamers more and more turning to console gaming and more action-orientated games. This was a pity, as Tim Schafer released, in my opinion, one of his finest adventure games to date, and when you consider his back catalogue includes Day of the Tentacle, we are comparing this to some all-time classics here. Called the Gim Fandango, it had you play Manny, a skeleton who works for the Department of Death as a travel agent for the underworld city of El Amaro. Making good use of 3D, the game was part Nightmare Before Christmas and part film noir, and it was wonderfully unique in both style and substance, and of course was racked full of humour. And it's so sad that such a classic is so difficult to get hold of and play today. In November 1998, little-known developer BioWare, who had been set up in 1995 by medical students Ray Muska, Greg Zeska, and Augustine Yip, and they'd graduated together from the University of Alberta. BioWare, of course, are better known today for their Knight of the Old Republic games and Mass Effect games, but back in 1998 they were only known for an obscure game called Shattered Steel in 1996. But all this would change when they would release Baldur's Gate, which took Dungeons & Dragons Forgotten Realms universe, but they made the game more accessible and intuitive, with the dice rolls hidden from the player. This made the game a joy to play, which when combined with the great storyline that they'd written, made for a hit game that was well received at the time. But there was another startup company at this time which came about when 2 Microsoft engineers decided to leave and set up a game developing company called Valve. This was by Harvard dropout Gabe Newell, who'd worked at Microsoft for 13 years and helped produce the first 3 Windows operating systems. The other was Mike Harrington, an ex-game programmer for Dynamics, who had joined Microsoft to work on the NT operating system. It was around the release of Windows 95 that Gabe, wanting to prove to the gaming developer world that Windows 95 system was a viable gaming platform, and so he offered John Carmack to port Doom to Windows 95 for free. Shortly after, one of Gabe's friends and co-worker Michael Abrash left Microsoft to join id Software and work on their new game, Quake. It was Michael Abrash who then encouraged Gabe and Mike Harrington to also leave Microsoft and go into gaming themselves. And when John Carmack of id Software agreed, even giving them the chance to license code of the new Quake engine to help out, they felt they couldn't refuse. So they set about designing their first game. Originally it was called Quiver, and they set about heavily modifying and improving the Quake game engine. They wanted a game that would scare but also have an engaging story, and so they enlisted science fiction writer Mark Laidlaw, who had made a name for himself with the books Dad's Nukes and 37th Mandala. For this game story he had you play Dr. Gordon Freeman, a theoretical physicist who must escape a huge underground research facility. They are experimenting into teleportation, and this results in opening a doorway to another dimension and allowing aliens to pass through. Armed with this new story, Valve decided to rename the game from Quiver to the name Half-Life, and they chose the Greek symbol lambda as the game's symbol, as this letter was the decay constant in the Half-Life theory. The game would finally be released on the 19th of November 1998, and it would take first-person shooters to the next level, with it mixing the compelling deep story with the action and engaging it in set pieces. The game did fantastically well and has won countless awards since its release. Looking Glass Studios, meanwhile, would release the brilliant game Thief at this time, called Thief: The Dark Project, and set it in an atmospheric steampunk medieval world. It had you play Garrett, who must make his way through the ranks to become the ultimate thief. Development of the game was tough, with Looking Glass Studios financially struggling, and so in development development of the Thief game, it resulted in half the team being made redundant, including Warren Spector himself. Many of the key members, including Warren, would go on to jobs of the newly created studio Ion Storm, but more on that later. The remaining staff, with low morale and heavy stress, would battle on, and despite 6 more people quitting over stress, the game would finally be released and do phenomenally well, selling over 500,000 copies and adored by the gaming press. In April 1999, Valve would take the idea of the mod for Quake, called Team Fortress, and by hiring the original modders, they would release Team Fortress Classic for Half-Life. The game was a big hit, offering different play modes such as Capture the Flag and Assassin, to name but a few. And inspired by their success, Valve would return in June 1999 with another mod of their Half-Life game called Counter-Strike. This was an entirely different experience, geared purely for multiplayer and opposing teams of up to 8 real players, as they played either the terrorists or the counter-terrorists. The following year, Valve extended and commercially released the game, with many extra maps to play. The game was immensely popular, with team clans being set up and leagues for the game that are still playing to this day. In July of this year, the third Discworld PC game was released, called Discworld Noir. This time you played Luton, the Discworld's first private eye, investigating a brutal murder. The game this time was set in full 3D, and although it lost a lot of its original charm because of that, it still was chock full of biting Discworld humour. But anyway, by August 1999, Looking Glass Studios, who had previously lost many of its staff the following year, went to developers Irrational Games, who had been started up by ex-Looking Glass developers such as Kevin Levine, who is best known today for his hit games Freedom Force and Bioshock. The game they wanted to co-develop was called System Shock 2, and they took all that was great about the original game, but ramped up the horror, making it a truly spooky behind-the-sofa game to play. In September 1999, Volition Software would release Free Space 2, taking all that was great about the first, but with a compelling storyline that really drew you in. The following month, Sierra would release their last adventure game called Gabriel Knight 3. Blood of the Sacred Blood of the Damned. This was the final part in the trilogy, and had you taking on vampires this time. The game was great, although the switch to 3D model characters, it did lose something of its atmosphere, in my opinion, of the first 2 games. Also this month, Sierra and newly created developer Relic, who are best known today for their Warhammer games, would release Homeworld. This took the real-time strategy game, but set it in space in full 3D, as you controlled masses of spacecrafts and attacked your enemies, watching the movie-like visuals depict the destruction. Ambitious French developer Quantic Dreams, better known today for their Heavy Rain game, would release their first game called Omicron: The Nomad Soul on the 1st of November 1999. The game was immense and immersive, offering the gamer a fully realised alien world for you to hunt the demon in. The game even had specially written game music by David Bowie, where in the game you could even go and see David Bowie in concert. The PC version of the game was awesome. It was just a shame that such an ambitious game was saddled with bugs and glitches that for many detracted from the gameplay experience. IGN gave the game 8.5 out of 10. In November 1999, Epic Games would release Unreal Tournament, which would take away the single-player story and instead concentrate on the multiplayer deathmatch, or single-player deathmatch against computer opponents called bots. The new direction appealed to many and allowed them to create one of the purest adrenaline blasters of all time. Then, in December 1999, just 10 days after the Unreal Tournament game had been released, id Software would return with their Quake 3 Arena. This was very similar in concept to Unreal, and again was a great adrenaline rush, and split many gamers down the middle, for which deathmatch blaster they preferred. In February 2000, Will Wright and Maxis would follow the natural conclusion of the Sim game and do The Sims, which had you design a house and create virtual humans to live there. The idea had originally come to Will way back in 1993 when he just finished the game Sim Ant, and he wondered if the intelligence he'd programmed on the ants could be altered to simulate humans. Will put the idea out to Maxis, but was given the big thumbs down by the testing group, who saw the concept of the game dull and uninteresting. So the game idea was put on ice, and Will went on to other games. Fast forward to 1996, and Will had managed to gather a small team to finally work on his Sims game, although it still garnered a lot of dislike within Maxis, where they thought the idea quite frankly poor, and had cruelly dubbed it the toilet game. After a year working on it, Will again went to management with the game so far, and again Maxis shut it down. Will, however, still believing in the game, carried on the development of the game in secret, now called Sim Dollhouse. It was reaching a similar look to the finished game we all know today, and testers were now giving positive feedback on it, although it was clear that teenage boys took exception to the name, seeing it as a girls' game, and so they changed the name to just The Sims. The game would go on to be the best-selling video game series of all time, on the PC that is, and it attracted a huge female demographic of gamers who liked having a game about interacting as opposed to killing. Back in November 1996, a new developer group had been formed called Ion Storm. It had been founded by id Software's John Romero, and it had some of the greatest fellow game designers, including Tom Hall, who had co-started id Software with John and had left when Doom was being written to develop Rise of the Triads. The game they first set about to work on was called Dakatana, and it was based on the Quake engine. It was originally penned to be released in March 1997 and was accompanied by an ego-fueled ad campaign promising the game would be the next big thing. But as time went on and the true ambitions were fully realised, the game would meet delay after delay. Then in July 1997, realising the new Quake 2 engine was released, they had to use the Quake 2 engine and rewrite everything, and of course this delayed things even more. The game finally limped out on the 23rd of May 2000, and although not a terrible game, it was dull, uninspired, with buggy non-player characters joining in on the action. And after so much hype and years of waiting, it made it a bitter gaming pill for many to swallow. However, thankfully, Ion Storm weren't just working on one game, and they'd hired the cream of Looking Glass Studios, including Warren Spector, who had been enticed by John Romero when he said, "Come and join Ion Storm and make the game of your dreams no limit." Armed with such a wonderful specification, Warren jumped at the chance. Warren had been in the gaming industry since 1990 when he helped develop the first two Wing Commander games and the Ultima 6 and 7 and Ultima Underworld games, before he joined Looking Glass Studios and worked on the first System Shock game. So with such a pedigree, it is little wonder that for Iron Storm, Warren and his team would create one of the best first-person shooters, perhaps of all time, called Deus Ex, and released on the 26th of June 2000. It was a perfectly realised dystopian cyberpunk future that had you follow rookie agent J.C. Denton as he made his way through an ever more engaging plot full of twists and turns. What made the game so special was that it perfectly blended the RPG elements and first-person shooter together with decision and morality choices that would have real repercussions in the story. The game won both critical and commercial success on release and went on to win countless awards and features in many gamers' top 10 lists. Wow, that was quite an episode again, wasn't it? But I think it was important to cover all these fantastic classic games that came out on the PC. Well, thanks for listening, and look out for my next episode where we look at Sega's last roll of the dice with their console called the Dreamcast, and Sony's continual dominance with the PlayStation 2. So until next time, see you later.